And hello, everybody. We've got Pitboss, Mr. Peter Barrett at the helm here, talking to you live, large, and in charge. Not live. I am recording this in my dungeon basement on my ancient iPad with a non-upgraded garage band from, I swear, 15, 20 years ago. It still has the DVD player and CD player in here if I wanted to put music and digitize it. These are all options because right now we're in a situation where everything has to be a subscription service. Everything has to be, you sign up to, you don't own concrete media anymore. You don't own your albums. You subscribe to a service and you pay somebody $5 a month indefinitely in order to access some of the music they will allow you to like. Considering that they don't, through some arbitrary system of censorship, take the music that you would prefer to listen to off of the air, or they disapprove of some of the lyrics being said and they take it off the air. So the difference between owning your old school hard media and subscribing to a subscription service is that you can get thoughts and ideas and potential programs outside of the approved public narrative. We're living in Canada, or I don't know where you're from, but we're living in Canada. There's a very specifically approved public narrative, and you can see as it shifts what is, I guess, wrong think. Critical thinking is now a bad thing. You're interested in thought crime. You're not allowed to access any content that would, I suppose, advocate for thought crime, advocate for incorrect thoughts, advocate for anything that would be outside the approved narrative. And we can see this increasingly in our degenerating society, where everybody on the streets, every working class individual I know and talk to witnesses our country falling into a toilet. But if somebody says it out loud, all of a sudden they potentially face criminal charges. And this is in a country where they continue to tell us that this is democratic, that this is a free country. But we're being taxed up the yin-yang, 30-40% of our income. 30-40% of the time you go to work, you are working for these programs for people that exploit you, right? But if you speak out, you're a dissident, you're a problematic element in the public narrative, and you need to shut down. You need to be shut down. And they've got no shortage of terminology that they will call you in order to shut you down. They'll call you a bigot, they'll call you a phobic, they'll call you intolerant, they'll call you right-wing, far right-wing, when you're just a centrist noticing, well, potentially, I don't know about you, but maybe you're like me, where I thought I was a liberal centrist for a very long time, and then I start noticing certain problems going on in society. I say, what's going on over here? Well, don't look at that. Well, why not? Why shouldn't I look at it? It's pretty obviously a problem. Well, that's bigoted to point that out. Well, okay, so what about the underlying symptoms of the issue, not the people necessarily committing it? Well, even if you point out that, like, let's say child neglect and alcoholism and child abuse or violence and property damage and property theft are problems in our society, if you point that out, the progressive narrative in this country says, well, you are problematic for noticing that there's problems. And why are you trying to criminalize the marginalized? I've literally had this go on. So yeah, if you own your hard media still, like books, like music, like movies, like documentaries, then you still have access to the unedited and uneditable versions of history. Owning a dictionary from, let's say, 1990, before the internet started replacing the dictionary, the definitions of words were hard and written down. Nobody could go in and edit the Wikipedia article on what gender means. Because I've got a 1989 abnormal psychology manual here, and I've got a 1970s dictionary here. And as far as gender goes, holy man, yeah, like 1 in 100,000 people, according to this abnormal psychology manual written, well, give or take, 30 years ago, maybe 35 years ago, 1 in 100,000 people suffer from gender identity disorder, right? When you thought you were born in the wrong body, as they like to say now. But now in 2025, there's 5 in my daughter's classroom. She's taking pictures on the street or at her university of like bearded women. But if you say, hey man, this isn't normal, then they say, well, normal's a bigoted word. Look it up online. The definition has been changed. Gender, the definition has been changed. Racism, the definition has been changed. So I grew up with the idea that racism was broad brushing anybody by any means, but particularly negatively on basis of the color of their skin. It's a prejudgment based on racial differences. Now it's power plus privilege. So people of certain demographics are no longer allowed to be racist, or when it's impossible for them to be racist, and people with power and privilege, everything they do is racist. Every opinion they have is racist. So, and you know what's weird is in the 90s, saying this was completely politically incorrect. But the Overton window has shifted so far to the extreme left that anybody who isn't on board with extreme leftism is considered a far-right radical. If you're like hypothetically, a church-going family father, patriarchal man, well, patriarchy, it's the worst thing ever. No, if you're the patriarch of a family and like you're church-going, you've got old-fashioned values, and God forbid you happen to be from European descent, you are one of the worst enemies out there. Now, I know everybody says that this is stoking the flames of division. And I'm like, yes, I guess maybe it is. Because this is the counteraction from a radical leftist ideology that also stoked the same flames of division. I grew up as kind of an activist in the 90s, and our idea on this stuff was that, how do you say, I guess it was equality of opportunity. It didn't matter what, race, creed, gender, whatever orientation you were. You had the opportunity to show that you could do a job, and if you could do the job, then you got the job based on your merit, not on your identity. But now in 2025, so what is that, 25 years later, it's equality of outcome. They want representation regardless of merit, representation regardless of, I guess, if you can do the job. We need X amount of members from this ethnicity, X amount of members from this orientation, and X amount of members. Okay, I get it. Like, why don't we have, and like, I get it. You want people to speak, but what if they don't have the skills? You want them to have a voice, but what if they can't do the job? So if your job is carrying a man outside a burning building and you can't do that job, it's a serious detriment if you give the wrong person that job. If your job is engineering and understanding the nuances of math and physics and hard science, and you can't do that job, but you got that job when you are, I guess, completely under-credentialed, you do not have the ability to do that work, you are legitimate danger to the people that depend on you. And so I don't understand this narrative. And, well, I do understand it, and I could lay it out for you, but it's good to have, I guess, the hard copies of this old school stuff, books, when you can find them, or I guess music, or I guess movies and documentaries. I mentioned that before. It's really good to have these in the event that they try to change the definitions of things. Things like nationalism. Things like traditionalism. I'll tell you a story really quickly because I do identify as a traditionalist. Like I had one friend, oh yeah, you got to be a fascist. And I'm like, no, I don't believe in like militarism and taking over your neighbor and that like we are the only right ones. I believe in ethics. I believe in traditional ethics, and I believe, well, my personal take as a perennial traditionalist is I believe that the core ethics of almost every legitimate faith in the world share some common values. And those common values are the traditions that we should be basing our values and our leadership and our our conduct and our lifestyles and our families on. So a traditionalist looks at all of the common, I guess, the common roots of all of these things. We recognize the core humanity in people. We recognize that, hey, you believe in a higher power, a God, a universal direction, and a natural law. Well, we're probably fairly similar. Now, the nuances, like the outside nuances, I guess they would call it the exoteric nuances of a religion, might be different, especially if they start pulling the we are the chosen tribe trip. And nobody else on earth is a child of God except our little tribe, or you need to, join our tribe, join our faith in order to be saved. Wow, you're really stuck on the outside. You haven't really delved into the inside of what your faith believes. But as a traditionalist, I read on traditionalist literature that increasingly you cannot find on mainstream media outlets. You cannot find them in bookstores, mainstream bookstores. You cannot find them definitely on any subscription. And the bands that sing about this stuff, because I'm an old punk rocker, they don't get Spotify accounts. And if you don't have the records or the vinyl, you're not going to hear those songs. And the books, increasingly, all they have to do is press a button on Amazon for you not to get it delivered to you. And you might be able to find a copy in a used bookstore somewhere. And I know. We're living in a generation where people don't read anymore. So consider this. I've gone through a couple really good audiobooks while traveling back and forth to my farm. For example, Julius Evola, Revolt Against the Modern World, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, Andy No, that's GNO, I think, his book on Antifa. Like, these books are still on Spotify for now, until the powers that be, or that Spotify hires somebody that says that something, for example, like Joe Rogan can't have the episodes on Spotify that have interviews criticizing trans identity. He got a $100 million contract for exclusivity with Spotify, right? But then he was told, but these episodes can't be on here because it offends some of our our diversity, inclusion, equity people. So he said, fine, $100 million. That's great. Like, hell, a guy like me, I'm doing this for free because I think what we're talking about is important and people might want to hear. But a guy like him, he's just getting money. So he takes a huge check and says, fine, I'll shut up about the thing. You know, I have exclusivity with you. So I guess the opinions that were said during those controversial episodes are for dust in the wind. Just disappeared on you. Because nobody needs to know what was ever said about that. Well, I personally believe that mutilating children sexually will be about the equivalent as like scientific fraud as lobotomy, hammering nails into people's heads to make their brains, work differently. I think it's going to be the biggest atrocity of, I guess, the beginning of the new millennium. And on an existential level, on my traditionalist level, I think it is one of the worst man-made horrors that we're going to see. Well, so far. We still have AI coming up. So yeah, as speaking of reading, before it's banned, I guess I was fairly polite when I wrote it. I did come up with the book Towards Vital Existence. Excuse me. I did come up with the book Towards Vital Existence. You can find it on Amazon by Peter David Barrett. Yes, it's a pseudonym. You might be surprised. I have people coming up to me like, why did you put a pseudonym? Why are you using a not a real name? Well, man, they just shot a Christian pundit in the throat because they didn't like what he said. He used some discussion points that made people uncomfortable so they can call him the big N-word, the new N-word. It's not N-I-G, it's N-A-Z. And they're quite interested in pigeonholing anybody they disagree with as being the most oppressive influence in the world. So this goes back to something which I've recently... I think a lot about this stuff. I think a lot about politics and like how to make people get along. And That's funny. Make them get along. How to help people get along. And I think one of the easiest ways is having a sense of gratitude and finding the commonality between your humanity. Now, this narrative that everybody's oppressed together, which is very Marxist, is that flawed narrative of unity through a common goal. But it's a common goal against someone, which is also one of the founding principles of fascism. You're going to unite the people against someone. And I don't know how this is being missed by mainstream media, right? The scapegoat that the systemic racism, the systemic oppression, the heteronormative Caucasian patriarchy, that is the new villain. That is the new villain. And uniting against a villain is one of the core principles. If you read Giovanni Gentile's doctrines and theory of philosophy and doctrine of fascism, uniting a nation or uniting the people against a common enemy is one of the core principles of fascism. Now you look at Marxism and uniting the working class, old Marxism, uniting the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, the property owner, and the working class needs to overthrow the managerial class, seize the means of production, because economy is destiny. And the new man shall be the great earner for the worker, for the working state, right? And the government owns everything, and you're a cog in a machine. Your individuality is out the window. And fascism is also, I do respect a little bit of fascism because it's a spiritual thing. It's a betterment thing. It needs to be. The new man is the righteous man, the holy man, the solar hero man. But politically, fascism also integrates the government controls everything. The government manages everything. The state is all, and you are just a working part of the state. Your individuality is crushed in favor of this unity and collectivism. Now, I do agree with a lot of the unity and collectivism, but you are also an individual part of the collective. You are a small little, orbit. You are a star unto yourself. You have things that surround you. Your life is like an orbit around you, and you are a little star existing in your little reality as part of a much bigger galaxy, which is your community, your city, your nation, the world you live in. Now, as an individual point of an aperture through which, your consciousness or the consciousness of the universe is aware of itself. Like, that's one of the principles, of Zen, is that every individual is an aperture through which the universe is aware of itself. Or, the spark of the divine. You are a little bit of God, recognizing God in a traditionalist sense of spirituality. Left-wing Marxism killed off God. They killed off religion. They said religion is the opiate of the masses. Well, okay, so you don't want people sedated, so instead you give them crushing, overarching dogma, and you tell them they need to be a cog in the mechanism that is the state, earning capital for the state. That's the greatest you can ever accomplish, is being a good worker for the collective. As opposed to, traditionalism, is the idea that whatever tradition you're following, whatever spirituality you're following, your goal is to be as righteous as you can within that tradition, achieve the liberation, the Buddhists would call it enlightenment, the Christians would call it theosis, the awakening, the revelations, you have the contact with your higher power, a direct line to it through mystic revelation, and you become the hero of your story. Traditionalism is closely tied to heroism, and it's closely tied to recognizing where you land in the hierarchy of reality. It's stripping away of illusions. It's standing in reality, as opposed to leftism and Marxism and fascism. They live in an illusion. Like, fascism depends on an illusionary past and an illusionary future. Marxism depends on this illusionary idea that people don't compete with each other. Now, my take is most traditions in this world, whether it's Christian or pagan or, Abrahamic or Buddhist or Hindu or Taoism, They have an existential unity. They have a core belief that we are all a part of one thing. We're all in one boat. I personally lean towards more like the pagan traditionalism, where it's like a little more ecological, maybe animist, maybe pantheist. I believe that the chosen tribe vibe of Abrahamism has, I'm sorry, your little sand tribe needed a protector deity that said, we are the best and everybody else sucks, therefore go slaughter them. And that became popular enough. And then people built their other religions off that same little protector deity in the middle of the desert protecting your sole tribe, so you are the only holy people. I don't necessarily buy that one, as opposed to the more nature-based religions that just tried to interpret what was around us and say, how do we live in accordance with this grand ecological order we find ourselves in, by whatever name they want to call it. Some called it Gaia, some called it God, some called it, or put personifications on different elements of it and called them the gods. That's pantheism. So traditionalism, to me, goes back to that core root, the foundational root that everybody is connected to, which is generally that our material reality is only the lowest and most root form of reality that we can exist in. We also have an emotional reality, a psychological reality, and a spiritual reality that as we work with those and we rise up through those, we start shedding our attachment to materialism and expanding into the larger transcendental values, right? Which is what the left say they're doing. It's what they claim to be doing. They're working off of empathy, and they say that the right is working off of cold, rational logic. You can have statistics that tell you hard facts, but it's different than looking in the eye of somebody who's suffering, right? And so this is actually traditionally, this is the huge balance between rationalism and emotionalism. Where do we draw the line? A rational mind is order and logic and law, and the emotional mind is liberty and freedom and tolerance. So the ideal society is a blend between law and order and liberty. And law and order without liberty is tyranny, and liberty without law and order is chaos. And so we've given these ideologues, these emotionally immature ideologues, because they have no law and order, they have no value on law and order, and they only see emotionally, what about the poor, suffering, oppressed person? And they're willing to do away with basic law, order, and morality in favor of tolerance without limit. And everything becomes relative. Ethical relativism, moral relativism, anything can go in the right circumstances. I remember having this debate with somebody because I was a cocky 20-year-old or 23-year-old one time. I said, oh yeah, anything is justified in the right circumstances. I was such a naive little fucker that I thought exactly everything. Like, murder in defense is okay. Murder to stop the murder of millions is okay. And this girl I know, and she's a Christian girl, she's like, well, there's no moral justification for child rape. And it hit me like a sledgehammer. And I'm like, holy shit. I guess I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but I never really thought about it. And so I started doing some thinking about that. Where what is the core root of this? And it's power seeking, it's domination, it's subjecting your will on another that cannot stop you, which is a profoundly dominant and predatory attitude. And there's areas like of nature that are predatory, but it depends. Usually natural predation is founded on survival, right? I need to kill this in order to feed my children and feed myself and continue and procreate and have a healthy family, as opposed to predation for selfish want and greed. That seems to be more of the consequence of a society of domestication. So, like, you see really creepy shit happen to animals that have been domesticated outside their natural environments, where, I'm not sure, I'm not proud of it, but many people have seen the monkey that rapes the frog's mouth. That's disgusting. There's all kinds of things like this. You go to the zoo, you're going to see some of the most degenerate and neurotic behavior from captive animals because it's outside of their natural environments. You're shoving them into situations that are unnatural. And this entire society, and with its increasingly overarching systems of rule and control and monitoring, is a profoundly unnatural environment for the human animal. Like, is ADD really a syndrome? Is it a disorder? Or is it only a disorder to the imposed toxic systems that they're shoving kids into? Like, somewhere along the line, some capitalist, oligarch, money-grabbing industrialist, and during the Industrial Revolution decided it's good for a child to stuff him in a room for 6-7 hours a day. Give him his lunch break, give him his, official recesses, just to mirror the industrial workday, and we're programming these children for a certain lifestyle, and they think that's normal. So yeah, I agree. I agree with a lot of people. I'm beyond left or right on this. It's kind of like the left and right, and more like right and wrong. I'm more into right and wrong, which to me is traditionalism versus the left-right paradigm. Traditionalism is a third position away from it, and I think we're living in profoundly unnatural environments. That being said, as long as we're here, we need to adhere to certain structures, like laws, like order, so we don't kill each other. A bunch of shaved, bald monkeys with weaponry and greed and perceived oppression or suffering, slaughtering each other to get ahead. I recognize that we need a profoundly different ideology, a different psychology in order for people to do better. And I don't think we're going to get it. My one friend, he's like, yeah, you're waiting for the strong man to lead us out, to fight us out of this way, right? The strong man, that's like fascism. And I'm like, no, man, I'm waiting for the righteous man to show us the way, to separate the wheat from the chaff, the good from the bad, and to once again set us straight. And it could be an avatar from the Bhagavad Gita, the Messiah from Abrahamic. It could be, a new Buddha. I don't care. As long as he's a righteous human being, man, woman, fucking potato, I don't care. As long as it's righteous and it tells us what's actually right and actually wrong in the universal sense, and people's psychology can be changed, that's what we need. Once upon a time, according to traditional societies, this was the rule of the benevolent monarch. This is monarchy. They are supposed to be righteous. They are supposed to be holy. They are supposed to be conduits. Like the Egyptian emperor was supposed to be a god on earth, and he behaved as such. That's another element. It's not like, I just tell everybody I'm a god on earth and I fuck everybody and I torture people. No, if you believe, or if a culture believes, or maybe this is a potential reality, that these people are divinely placed, then they should behave like they're divinely placed. They shouldn't be, slaves to the whims of modernity, with every lust and every excess. They should be disciplined like monks. So it's interesting to point this out, and I do talk about it in the book, Towards Vital Existence, that traditional caste systems of Europe, of India, they were set up where the people of knowledge were at the top, the holy men, the interpreters of omens, the understanders of religious principles, of morals, of ethics, of basic moral direction were at the top echelon of society. And underneath there were the rulers. The kings, the queens, the monarchy, but also the knights and the protectors of order. So you had people of knowledge at the top level, and underneath that you had protectors of order. And underneath that you had the artisans and the creators and the farmers, the people that actually made the world to keep us alive, right? So in order, and then at the lowest level of traditional hierarchies, you have the merchants. The people that buy something that somebody else made, they put an extra price tag on it and they send it off to somebody else. They sell it at a profit. And even below that were the people that just lent money at interest. They're making money from nothing. None of those people work. The top three levels of these hierarchies, of these caste systems, well, the holy men, They studied ancient wisdom. They discerned natural order. They taught people right from wrong, what is good, what is bad, why it is good, why it is bad, how you can sacrifice, how we can sacrifice part of our lives for the greater good, and how rulers should ethically and morally behave and how they should treat their people. And the rulers would tell ideally, their legions of whether it was samurai or knights or, lords, how to morally and ethically treat their people. And it would be a benevolent dictatorship that cared about the people as opposed to these narrative of oppression again, the narrative of oppression that everybody who was ever elite was always corrupt and degenerate and cruel, right? So the people of knowledge, then those that with an invested interest in order, and then the creators, the food creators, the builders, the construction men, farmers. They usually traditionally held a higher level than the merchants, the people that just bought from the farmer and made bread and sold it to somebody, right? I guess bakers, you're actually making something. I guess at the lower level of the creators would be artisans, but underneath that is just these, where we're living today, where, oh man, I've got a dropship account. I buy from some huge factory in China and I sell it to some dummy in America. That's a pretty low level on traditional hierarchies. But below that are credit companies, are banks, where you give me the money and I lend it to somebody else, but I ask him for a quarter more to give it back to me and I lend it for somebody else. Traditional societies believed that if you weren't actually creating and doing work and having a productive part of society, then you were a parasite on society. And even underneath that, underneath those levels of the moneylenders were actually usually in the lowest rungs, along with the gambling houses and the prostitutes and the slaughterhouses and like the sewage cleaners. That's where those people existed in traditional hierarchies. In a corrupted hierarchy, like we're living in modern 21st century, oh my God, the merchants are at the top and the money lenders are at the top and our leaders are degenerate. They're thieves, they're scumbags, they're greedy, they grab them by the pussy, or, they go off to Epstein Island and they diddle kids. These are the people we've entrusted to our freedom. These are the people our lives are in servitude for now. These economic elites, and it turns around every newsreel with some other super rich hedge fund degenerate doing sick and twisted things because he thinks he has enough money to get away with it. That is legitimately tradition reversed. The noble is put at the bottom rungs of our society. The righteous people are actually increasingly being outlawed and told that praying for an unborn baby is a crime and you should go to jail for that, while the woman who's going on to her 14th abortion is a hero of women's justice and women's liberation. That is legitimately an inverted society where righteousness is at the bottom and degeneracy is at the top. And once you start realizing this, like that's the only principle you need to know, is that once you realize that our goal in life is transcending our lower self in favor of our higher self, and it goes along with the hierarchies, right? So you think about this, you've got materialism at the bottom. Okay, everybody's existing in materialism. You have to meet your material needs. You move up to your emotional needs. Well, I need to feel good. I need to care. I need to feel validated. Then you move up to your intellectual needs. Oh, wow. I guess I can create. I can grow. I can educate. But then the highest level that your goal of transcendence would be your spiritual evolution, your connection with your own personal version of God. And once you do that, you become a holistic being. You self-actualize. You're able to engage with your environment, engage with your common man. You see the humanity of all people and you recognize, yeah, man, what you're doing is wrong. And I guess there's a place in society for that. If you really, really want to be degenerate, go off with the degenerates in your dark alleys and dark corners and do your degenerate shit, which is how it was for 1,000 years. The brothels existed in certain areas. It wasn't like, oh, high life, let's go off to the brothels. Let's go worship the brothel. Same thing with the gambling, same thing with the moneylenders, same thing with the slaughterhouses and all that other stuff that was in certain areas. But righteous people did righteous things, and degenerate people did degenerate things, and we all had our place. Everybody knew where the place was. It's relativism, it's moral relativism that comes along and tells us, oh no, in this situation this is acceptable. The age of consent is gray. You know, science, our best science, because we say trust the science, our best science tells us that brains don't solidify to understand the consequences of their actions till they're 25, but we should lower the age of consent for sexual behavior. We should allow children in elementary school to learn about anal sex for some fucking reason. We should, just have gender-bending fetishists having access to impressionable children to normalize what is inherently abnormal. I remember reading in Japanese culture, they have a subset of manga and their anime called hentai. And hentai, I'm like, what does this word mean? And it means deviant. It just means deviant. But overuse, this term deviance has taken on a sexual connotation, an erotic connotation. So when they say, oh, that's a hentai movie, that's a pervert movie. Because the word pervert is the same thing. This word pervert in English means deviant. That's a perverted course of justice. That's a deviant course of justice. But again, same thing in English, the word pervert has a sexual connotation now. It's just been used to... So basically, when you say, oh, I watch hentai movies, they're saying in Japanese, I watch pervert movies. Cool, you're into perverts. Because you recognize that it's abnormal. And by the core value of saying it's a deviant thing, it means it deviates from the normal stream of acceptable behavior. The core principle here is normal behavior is one way, and what you're doing there is deviant. It is not, it could go better or worse. Like, don't get me wrong, a monk living off in like some monastery completely chaste, well, that's deviant in its own way, right? The same thing as these thruples involved with like polyamorous gender-bending orgies is deviant. And again, the dictionaries are changing this. Normal, the word standard, the words healthy, the words tradition are all being redefined by the lowest denominators of society. The most degenerate, hedonistic, drug-addicted, food-addicted, sensory pleasure-addicted individuals out here with zero self-discipline, with zero ability to say no to themselves, are the ones that are telling you that you're oppressing them. And again, it's the narrative of oppression. And I'm going to say this because I want it to come into common lexicon. I want this to be regularly used because I think it's very, very important that a narrative of oppression is what we're dealing with. And Marxism says that the narrative of oppression applied to the workers are being oppressed by the business owners, by the industrialists. The workers are oppressed. Narrative of oppression. You can go back further. Hell, the Old Testament is a narrative of oppression. Let my people go. You know, Moses trying to liberate the Hebrews from the oppression of the Pharaoh and the Egyptian state is a narrative of oppression. Hell, it's the cornerstone of their religion. A narrative of oppression. So then that narrative of oppression carries over to every program, every place that, the Hebrews or, the Jewish people have been kicked out of. There's a narrative of oppression that comes along. And it's funny because then, they found this political system called, Marxism and communism, where the narrative of oppression is now applied to the worker being oppressed by the property owner. The proletariat is oppressed by the bourgeoisie and needs to overthrow them for the collective good of all. Okay, sure. So what happens to them? Oh, there's violent revolution. We kill them. They leave that part out, of the narrative of oppression, that the end goal of liberation, which is our calling card, liberate. Yeah, liberation means violence against the oppressor. Okay? Whoever you can point the finger at and say, you're oppressing me. So what happens with Marxism is it spawns a huge current of thought. And again, they've killed off tradition, they've killed off religion. There's no room for existential truth, for eternal truths that have been documented for thousands and thousands of years. This idea of the narrative of oppression gets propagated over and over and over again into Marxism, the economic version of Marxism, where the proletariat, the working class, and the bourgeoisie, the rich, the haves and the have-nots. As a matter of fact, Marxism is predicated on, like, history is a struggle between the haves and the have-nots, because the people that have always oppressed those that have not. And you grow up with this. So in the 30s, there's a research group of Marxists that were called the Frankfurt School. And they started applying the narrative of oppression to intersecting levels of oppression. So they say, well, if there's somebody who's achieving and somebody who isn't, obviously the achiever, the successful individual, has oppressed the person who isn't successful. So we need to educate them that the men are oppressing the women, that the locals are oppressing the new to the country, that the dominant people in any system are obviously oppressing the non-dominant. It's not that it's their system because they're dominant or because they civilized it. It is because they've oppressed people. And this narrative, and it's called the kyriarchy. It's a pyramid. And, at the very top of the kyriarchy is the most oppressive person who's oppressing everybody under him. So it would probably be like the billionaire, Caucasian, heterosexual, normative values is the top evildoer at the top of the kyriarchy, according to critical theory or intersectional thought. So this Frankfurt School didn't like the rise of fascism, calling them out in Germany at the time, so they ran away to America. And they embedded themselves in academia in the early 50s in Columbia University, Berkeley, in California, in New York City. And this school of thought started writing and dumbing their stuff down for the common people and the common students to understand. They got involved with the 60s civil rights movement, where, don't you know, black man, that the white man is oppressing you, or has forever? And just like us, throughout the Old Testament, let my people go. You need to, cross the River Jordan, buddy, and get to freedom out of your emancipation, break your chains. And then that same narrative of oppression was told to women. Don't you know that this structure of your family and you just being a baby-making oppressive, oppressed individual has, you're oppressed by this thing called the patriarchy. It's always been men-run. It's always has been. And once I tell you about this, you're going to see it everywhere you look. And even if you don't see it, you can create it. So we've got racism. We have sexism. Oh, queer theory. Don't you know that, like, being stuck in those back alley bars, you're being oppressed by heteronormative behavior? The fact that they're doing raids and arresting you for immorality charges, you are oppressed. You need to be liberated. So this narrative of oppression got propagated into what they call the civil rights movement, which, as a good Canadian person, this has been entrenched in our value system, that we protect the innocent. It's a Christian value, technically, because we are a Judeo-Christian nation. Actually, we are a Christian-founded nation, because most of what we do is based on the New Testament, not the Old Testament. For those that aren't aware, the Old Testament is essentially the Torah, right? That's the Jewish Bible. And the New Testament is the Bible of Christians. It's after Christ came. It's a story of Christ's life. Like, they technically are two different religions, but for some reason they still hold on to the Old Testament because they're trying to hold to some of the traditions. That's the Judeo part of the Judeo-Christian. So Canada is a Christian nation, and we've grown up with these values that, we are against oppression. We are against tyranny. We are against the oppression and exploitation and violence against innocent people. Now, keep that in mind, because it's important that it's we protect the innocent. We don't protect the corrupt. But nowadays, no matter how corrupt they are, well, don't you know they're a victim? You haven't taken into account their trauma that they experienced. Well, they're a fucking monster. Yeah, but they're a traumatized person. They're not a monster, but they did some monstrous stuff. Yeah, but you don't know what's happened to them. So this is a weird new generation. So the civil rights movement really took off, and moral people, ethical, Christian people with their hearts in the right place looked at this and said, I do not stand by the oppression of the innocent. In the same way that I stand against child abuse or child exploitation or child influence by corrupt influences, these people said, well, if you've done nothing wrong in your life, you shouldn't be oppressed by the virtue of where you were being born. You aren't stuck in a lifestyle just because you were born there. If you are a good moral person, it doesn't matter who you are. They forget that that is merit. That is merit. And merit takes effort. It takes skill. It takes discipline and the ability to transcend your past self or your circumstances you were born into to be a good moral human being in the country that you live in. So the civil rights movement pretended that we're all the same regardless. What I agree with is, yeah, the civil rights movement says if we are all the same and we have the same values and the same ethics, then we should be treated the same. The reality of the situation is, if you do not share the same ethics and the same values and you're living like a degenerate, we should recognize that you're a degenerate. Now, I don't believe that your ethnicity should hold you back or your gender should hold you back. You know, keep in mind real gender, male, female. Right? I don't believe being a man or a woman should hold you back if you have the merit to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So after embedding themselves in Berkeley, these communists, these Marxist thinkers of critical theory, they invented that term, critical theory, intersectionalism, and patriarchy, and overarching systems of oppression. They also got quite involved with the media. They got very involved with the music industry. There's lots of money to be made. They had no issue taking these black people's music, largely based on the suffering that came along with non-consensual slavery, and let my people go. These people said, man, we can make some money off that. I can relate to your struggle. I'm going to make some money off your story. We'll give you a little bit, but we're going to make money behind the scenes, lots of money. We'll make money forever. You make a little bit off this album. And so they were able to propagate this new music to the mainstream. And technically, you got to keep in mind, a lot of this music was music of trauma. It was like poetry of the streets. No, it's a music of trauma. It's a music of anger, of frustration, of, ethics that come from traumatized environments, abuse, infidelity, sexual escapades. And a group of these people were making a lot of money off of these traumatized people creating media. And that story of the oppression narrative was repeated ad nauseum. From the time you grow up, every cartoon we've ever watched is an oppression of narrative, or the narrative of oppression. Like, we need to liberate the poor princess from the overarching evil of the wicked stepmother, or the evil witch, or all these cartoons are like, bad guys are coming, they're gonna oppress you. Not like, or the rich man is on top and he's holding you down from accomplishing. Everybody with money, everybody with success, they're all corrupt. They're all dangerous. They're all going to hurt you. They're coming for you. You need to be a hero and fight them back. That narrative of oppression, if repeated enough, in many, many different forms, becomes your reality, becomes your ethic. So everybody's oppressed by something. So yeah, the civil rights movement in some ways, it was a great attempt, but it failed to recognize that different people have different aptitudes and inclinations and abilities. Like, some people are just not cut out for the same jobs as everybody. Quit pretending we're all the same. Your idea of equality and equity is a false god. Some people are faster, some are slower, some are tall, some are short, some are strong, some are weak, some are intelligent, some are stupid. Can we stop pretending that the smartest person on the planet and, the handicapped guy down the street who's walking in circles and drooling are the same thing just because we're both childs of God? Everything has its watermark. And I think this is where traditionalism separates from modernism or modernity, where a rational person with a rooted consciousness in reality recognizes what is good, what is bad, what is toxic, what is healthy. And these people are pretending what is toxic is healthy, to the degree where we can watch popular media and some fabulous gender-bending whack job gets huge money and a record deal, and his music videos have him being pissed on in the face because he's a sexual liberation, expert or, aficionado, and everybody's going to cheer for him, and no one's allowed to criticize that behavior. No one's even allowed to say, well, oh, fuck, God forbid you say it's toxic, but you're not even allowed to say it's abnormal because then you're an oppressor. You are the bad guy. Because tolerance becomes the virtue regardless of the thing being tolerated. Now, that being said, they probably wouldn't accept a lot of these degenerates in their living rooms or in their bedrooms next to their own children, but they tell you that you need to accept them in your neighborhood. The case in point, when they bust all of these, new to America people to, I forget where it was, Martha's Vineyard or something like that, and all these like liberal, rich, left-wing people in Martha's Vineyard, they got them the soup out there, they got them sandwiches, and they turned them around and put them back on the fucking buses. We don't want you here. Because what we're forgetting is that people find their own water level. And nations find their own water level. And cultures find their own water level. And the cultures that accomplish are the accomplished cultures. And you can say, but they've been oppressed and they've been exploited. And yes, that has happened to a degree. There's also a lot of situations where the culture that was now being accused of oppressing and exploiting was actually trying to civilize and bring them technology and hygiene and health and infrastructure. But you pull up King Leopold II in the rubber plantations and chopping off hands of people that didn't get him his resources quick enough and use that as an example. Hell, I know people that lived in South Africa before the apartheid was done. You can find these people on Reddit, like black people, that said, well, man, before apartheid was finished, we could have our own businesses, we could, get our own education, we could accomplish. Yes, we were a separate society, but an accomplished black person was an accomplished black person, so we decolonized because it was just so oppressive. Somebody from somewhere showed up and said, oh, don't you know that segregation is oppressive? And then they decolonized. And what's South Africa look like today? What does Zimbabwe look like today compared to Rhodesia? You tell me. Do a little bit of research and take a look at what their decolonization program actually accomplished. What does the intersectional theory of overthrowing the oppressors look like today? What kind of better world are they setting up? These people that are getting hired to build planes, the planes fall apart. They get hired to maintain infrastructure in cities. They don't do their job. I forget where it was, but there was a city. They had a lot invested in the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. And they hired these people to manage their water treatment facilities. And they didn't know how to do it. They were undereducated, underprepared, underskilled. And they had to call in the National Guard because the city wasn't getting clean water anymore. And the National Guard rolls in and they're like, oh my God, this is like a state of emergency, like an entire city without water. And they show up and they press the button you need to operate the machines properly. That's it. They pressed a button. It wasn't that there was some huge infrastructure failure. Well, there was an infrastructure failure in that they had idiots at the helm. And we don't pay attention to that. And our guilt, the emotional side of accomplished cultures, our guilt about having money when somebody has none, our guilt about being accomplished when somebody's an idiot, our guilt about being successful when somebody else is a failure. It kills us. It's going to kill us. Our empathy will be our noose, people. You need to remember this because we will hang ourselves with our own empathy and we say, oh, the poor refugee people from these war-torn places or these impoverished places with fucked up value systems, we need to take them and we need to take care of them. It's our moral obligation. And then everything they do that they've brought from these really toxic environments, we need to tolerate that because tolerance is a virtue regardless of the thing being tolerated. You just have to tolerate it. You have to tolerate it. Pooping on the streets, tolerated. Grabbing women in public, tolerate it. Lying about our credentials so we can get a job regardless of whether we can do it, and we drive a semi into a bus full of 16 kids in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, you tolerate that. Because to say otherwise, you wouldn't want to be intolerant. You don't want to be called the bad word. Whatever it is, a bigot, racist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever injunction they can do from rational thinking, whatever they could throw at you and say, nope, you're not allowed to notice that thing. You've been noticing a little too much. Looks like you've had a bit too much to think. You need to go have a timeout in the corner. And then they legislate this. They make it illegal to say these things out loud. It's interesting because in the overarching, regime of Stalinism and communist Russia, these rebels, legitimate rebels, introduced underground publications to advocate for democracy, to advocate for free markets, to advocate for freedom versus the overarching systems of authority that were being imposed. And they were called samizdat, Samizdat, samizdat. Take a look at it, because that's what you're listening to. There might only be 5-10 people that even listen to this podcast, but this is a samizdat. This is an underground digital communication. Hopefully you can save it. Hopefully you can share it with friends. Hopefully that somebody out there will say, I never thought about it that way. And they can talk about merit versus unnecessary achievement. They could talk about what's being lied about in mainstream media and the mainstream social services. Because these people are coming from compromised academics, compromised academia, with false narratives, like the narrative of oppression, eternal oppression. Sorry, you aren't a slave. This isn't the Pharaoh and the Hebrews. It's not like the Puritans and the African slave owners. It's not original old school colonialism where the French bought slaves off of the indigenous slave owners. I love this one. You get to hear about all of this stuff. We've oppressed these indigenous people with our colonial systems, which we hear about on our very colonial media. We've oppressed them, and they leave out the struggle for food and the raiding parties and the rape gangs where they kill all the men, kidnap the women and the children and make them slaves. What do you think they do to slaves? How do they have babies with slaves? Is that consensual? Is that consensual, like noble pre-colonial life when you're screaming and crying because you're led away on a rope tied to the back of a horse to be fucked and your children are going to be slaves? Was that the romantic version that we're trying to save? When the missionaries ran into the Haida on the West Coast, they finally, the colonial systems finally got across the entire continent and from the East Coast, closest to Europe, to the West Coast. And they met the Haida tribe, who had been raiding and enslaving all the other tribes up and down the West Coast. And any slave, any child they had after enslavement, their children are slaves, so that you got intergenerational slavery by the Haida people of their own, or of other indigenous tribes, because it's not their own people. The slaves approached the missionaries and asked if Jesus Christ would save them and their children from slavery, if they would be released from slavery. And it was still practiced until colonial systems enforced slavery to be eradicated. So Europeans stopped the enslavement of other people. Here in Saskatchewan, where I am, you've got the Dene and the Cree. And that hatred still runs, man. I know Cree people that say straight up, like, Dene are dog eaters, man. They're lowlives. And I'm like, fuck, really? You think that? Dene are dog eaters? But at the same time, the Dene were the slaves. The Cree would enslave the Dene. We have the Great Slave Lakes. We've got Slave Lake, Slave River, all based off of where the Dene lived and where the Cree would go and raid to kidnap and enslave the people. So talking about ethics and saying, oh, we had a way of life before you came. What was your way of life? Well, was it really something you want to return to? Cool. Give me back the wheel. Give me back the electricity. Give me back, wood houses and vehicles and firearms and everything you use every fucking day and live your pre-colonial paradise. Because it's not. Nobody lived in Saskatchewan year-round. They ran somewhere warm during the winters. It was crazy Europeans that put down the tent pegs and decided to tough it out. So yeah, the narrative of oppression, it goes on and on and on and on. And we haven't really done the math on whether it's accurate or not. It's almost like resentment disguised as compassion. Like hypothetically, if I've got a business owner, a wealthy business owner, and he's giving me the opportunity to climb the ranks. Yes, he makes more money. He established this once upon a time. He's giving me the opportunity to climb the ranks and maybe educate me on starting my own business and accomplishing that myself. Is he oppressing me because he makes more money? Is he exploiting me because I'm doing work? Well, the narrative of oppression would have you think so. They think that you should just take it. You don't know how to manage it. You don't know how to do that work. You don't know how to create what he's creating. You don't even know how to create the things he's selling. You're just a salesperson or a stock boy, but you're being oppressed by this individual. How else are you going to live? Go create. Go create something and protect it, because you don't believe in police and you don't believe in the business owners and you don't believe in the free market. So you go chop wood, carry water, hunt deer, grow food, build your shelter. You live that pre-colonial life and see how far you can go. Because I'm out there in the bush. Ticks suck. Ticks suck. Winters suck. Dead crops suck. Especially if you're also dealing with bad guys that want what you have. Very, very soon, you're going to wish for a system of order and laws to keep bad guys that are stronger than you from coming for the things that you've struggled to establish. This is simple logic. I don't know how these people can fucking not work it out. Somewhere along the line, somebody came up to a woman and said, these kids that love you and look up to you that you get to hang out with and play in this household that you've maintained while your husband is working to pay for all of the necessities, that's oppression. That's oppression. What you need to do instead is get a job just like your husband, pay taxes, dump your children into questionable institutions to educate them, and then you'll be liberated. Or hey, even better, stop having kids. Liberate yourself. You're not the slave of a man. Stop it. You've been oppressed by them. And now look what happens 60 years later, where the first wave of radical feminists are all in their 60s and 70s, and they're dying alone. They have nobody. They have no family to take care of them. They have no husband to hold their hand in their last moments. They have nobody. They've got some great articles. They've got some great literature. They've got some great theory being eaten up by naive idiots in a compromised academic system. Yep, that's what they've got. That's their legacy, because they have no legacy. They have nothing to leave. They've really created nothing except chaos. They've dismantled what hardworking and good people have struggled for. Literally, the family unit, the traditional, normal, healthy family unit, has kept our species together for 25,000 years? And in the last 25 years, these ideologues, the oppression narrative, has shit all over it, dismantled it to replace it with what? And then you have situations where the oppressed people that have really utilized the oppression narrative to the maximum degree become intolerant, genocidal maniacs themselves and decide it's okay to oppress other people because they've been oppressed. When they're finally achieve the revenge country, the revolution they want, and they achieve their utopia of the oppressed people all together in their own little segregated oppression state, they become the new tyrants. And the cycle goes on and on and on and on. So I guess, again, you could check out my book, Towards Vital Existence. It's not as harsh as this. It's got a fair amount of citing and sourcing. But there's a better way, and I think it's tradition. I think we need to reject the oppression narrative, or the victimhood narrative is another one, and start moving towards a heroic narrative of accomplishment and creativity and education and self-refinement and accountability. Yes, we've all done toxic things. Be accountable and move on. Own your shit, move on. What are you doing now as opposed to what's happened to you in the past? All right, it's off to a Christmas party tonight. Wish me best of luck. I love Christmas party. I love Christmas, man. Remember, that guy who gave us all the foundational ethics that our entire culture is based upon, he was born December 25th. Regardless of what you believe that guy was, he gave us the basic values that said help the people that need help and don't fuck around with kids, and keep the money changers out of the temple. All right, I love you guys. Feel free to leave a message. Share this with friends, man. Share this with friends. We need more people to wake up. All right. Peace, love, and granola. Catch you on the rebound.